It does seem to me that you can trace the loss of patriotism and belief in America, more broadly, perhaps even belief in liberal participatory democratic capitalism. That's a bit of a mouthful amongst younger people. So I understand older Americans are still very patriotic. Younger Americans, very few are patriotic. That's a massive change, particularly in the most powerful nation on earth.
That's interesting. I mean, I think it's a story, certainly in the American context, that you would want to go back to, the Vietnam War, and examine the significant change in the way, especially younger Americans, began to think about government authority, the role of America in the broader international scene in that context. And in so many ways, I see our current moment, especially on campus, as very much a replay of many of the dynamics familiar from the late 1960s and early 1970s. I mean, in some cases, our student groups are very aware of these parallels. And, we've had student groups on campus who've gone back into our archives and pulled up, manifestos by activist groups from the late 1960s and read those at their rallies, right? So the students themselves see these parallels. I think, though, that erosion of sense of commitment to a national project, a sense of being part of and loyal to a community much bigger, certainly, than yourself, and bigger even than your local community, a sense that you have something in common with a wide range of people who are part of a force that, while it's not infallible, is a presence for good in the world. I think you're absolutely right that sense has eroded, especially among younger Americans, and especially on the American left. The term patriotism has become kind of radioactive. And periodically, I see, opinion pieces in the newspapers by liberals lamenting this, saying, this is an enormous problem. And I think, we can perhaps tease apart the degree to which, in political discourse, certain terms become captured and associated with one political position in a way that is kind of misleading and unfair. So if you really were to sit down with every young every college student, certainly at a place like UNC, and ask them, in a detailed interview, how do you really feel about your country? What are you hopeful about? What are you afraid of? I think a much more nuanced view would come to the fore. I mean, I'm in general pretty inspired by my students. I think cynicism is a problem, but it's maybe not as pervasive as we think. However, I mean, this has been the story of patriotism is in some ways a casualty of the kind of polarization that we've seen, which is of course not a uniquely American story, but one in which the fragmentation has really ignited this sense of tribalism that I think is at odds with patriotism in its best sense, which should really overcome all those tribal narratives of the culture wars.